to look over before we call this meeting to order. It's a pretty short agenda, but it's got a lot of details once we get going. All right, well, how about we call it to order at 5:31, and who would volunteer to do the flag salute for us?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thanks, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me in the salute. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the
United States of America and to the republic
for which
it stands, one nation,
under
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. Crystal, can I ask you to please turn on your camera? We were asked to have all the attendees with their cameras on for meetings.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so I will go back to my screen share so we have the minutes in front. Oops, so the agenda's in front of us here. And we do not, I don't see any guests. Celia, do you see any guests besides our meeting members?
No, I do not.
Okay. So there is no public forum. Can I get an approval of the agenda since you can now see it in front of you, please? I need a.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Thank you, Joe.
I second it.
Great. And
Tegan, can you make the font a little larger?
I'll try. How's that? Better? Or a little bit larger still?
A little bit larger still. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, you're
Appreciate it.
welcome. Whoops.
She's testing your skills, Tegan.
Well, you'll find I don't have too many here. Okay, so we need to take a vote. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. And I guess we'll just do a roll call. Crystal?
Yes.
Jaida?
Present.
The approval of the agenda is what we're on right now.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yes. Approved.
John Egg?
Yes, approved.
And Joe?
Yes.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing, but we have the minutes next, approval of the minutes. And I know there might be a change.
Yeah, if I may. The item D on the printed minutes, it talks about the motion to approve the agenda for the 26th of 21, and it's got Tang and Umarini. That happens to be crossover.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That's left over from an old meeting. We didn't have any minutes to approve at that last meeting.
Exactly.
Because it was our first meeting. Okay. Thank you. We will.
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
It made no sense. Yes. Thank you. We will correct that. Okay. With that correction, do I have a motion to approve?
I approve.
Approved.
And can we get a voice vote on this one as well, please? Crystal?
Yes.
And Joe?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Joida?
Yes.
Okay, now we get to do the fun stuff. So now I will share again. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that. Are you able to see the screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
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 Okay, so we are here for our Park Markers Subcommittee meeting for May 24th. And just to quickly review what we talked about last time, this group was leaning towards some sort of a kiosk-y type structure that would have interpretive panels and art on it. And the question, we also talked about having 2D art on the panel as well as the marker style being artistic. And when we go through here, I think we want to just clarify that it is in fact an artist-built kiosk that you are thinking of. So I'm gonna share some kiosk ideas, and I'm not gonna share prefab kiosks. You've seen them in other parks before, so you know what those look like. They can be metal, they can be wood, but they all look the same and they're pretty basic. So what I'm sharing with you are artist-built kiosks that do have interpretive information on them. So that first one, the kiosk itself kind of has a sculptural look to it. And then the interpretive information below. The second one, obviously, you can see that it's got the interpretive information printed on the metal, and an artist's drawing also printed on the metal. The third one, the interpretive panel looks fairly straightforward. The little structure is artist designed, and the piece to the left that you see with the cutout is artist designed. These next ones are also, I would say, artist designed. The first one is, it has the text, I believe, is on the back side, so we can't see it, but it does have interpretive text on the back. The center one is metal with a cutout, so you can see the sky in the background behind the bird. And then the interpretive portion is printed on the metal. The third one on that slide is printed on glass. I think that one's really cool to show you what it looked like previously. So I thought Joe would like this one.
Yeah, I do. The third one's I don't think it necessarily works for what we're talking about, but I love the third one.
I just included it to show you that you could print on glass and see the park
Yes.
through the glass. But
Which is an intriguing idea.
I did like that one.
Yeah.
On this one, we have one that's a sort of monument style on the left, with the interpretive panel mounted on it. So you've kind of got almost a bench-like structure there. The centerpiece that style would allow us for a lot more text and a lot more photographs or artwork. It probably, the art part that shows to people would be what's showing on the panel more than the design of the structure itself. The third one, the one on the right, is from San Diego, and they've got the artist designed, look of the panel. So it's kind of architectural, and then the wraparound round interpretive panel. So that was kind of interesting. I hadn't seen one that was round like that before, but if you were at that San Diego park, all their different signage has these little designed markers on the top that are like wind vanes. And that sort of gives you a visual as you're walking through the park that those are art markers, or in this case, bird markers. But I know you guys had talked about wanting to have something that people would recognize as they were walking through the park and know instantly that, oh, this thing has historical information on it. So, so that was an idea. So those are kind of what I came up with and was able to find that I think are similar to what you might be thinking. Am I kind of headed in the right direction? Back to the pictures.
Do you want an answer from all of us? I like the idea. I think there's sufficient suggestions there and choices that it would be nice if we could sort of narrow it down a little bit, even tonight, if it were possible.
So John, I don't think what we're gonna do is able to be narrowing it down, because I think your artist is gonna design this. So
Okay.
what I'm trying to do is get enough that I can write an RFQ and, get some artists interested in applying for it, and also so I can get some budget information. So I'm trying to figure out, is this roughly what you guys are thinking of? Is it too grand in comparison to what you're thinking of?
I do have a question on any of these. Can we, or should they be lighted? Should we have power to them? Because, we get to the winter times, the parks are dark very early in the afternoon. So
Mhm.
would we, or should we include power?
I think what we would do, if you're interested in power, is we would ask for the proposals to include that. Power is very expensive to put in if it's not already there.
Yeah.
So what I'm guessing would happen would be there would be some sort of solar lit LED kind of
Yeah,
lighting, but do keep in mind that the parks are not meant to be used after dark. They shut at dusk, so we're not terribly worried about lighting these things from a park user standpoint at night. So if you were to go through our parks and look at the artwork that's in the parks right now, I don't believe any of it is lit for that reason.
Mm. Okay.
So, but as you go back through and look at them, is a monument, artist designed monument, what we want, or were you not thinking of something quite so so unique, I guess?
yeah.
Art.
I really like the one which is printed in the middle.
Oh,
It has a good shape, and information can be wrapped in that. It looks really easy to read, and you can kind of go around it and read it. But I was wondering, for this meeting, we are just focused on park meters, right? And we are not focused on sculptures or any of that we were talking about before, benches and things like that.
Right. Well, I understood from our last meeting that as far as markers go, you wanted something that was a structure of some sort that people would identify as they were coming through, and we wanted to have room on the structure for interpretive text to explain the history of the park's namesake and a little bit about the park, and that we also wanted artistic images, drawings or photos or something. So what I was trying to do was show you, based on what I heard you say last time, these are the kinds of markers that I think you're going for. So I think what we're ultimately looking for is a sculptor to design a marker, and then perhaps additional artists to design images that go on the marker, or maybe the sculptor also has those skills, or maybe it's not so important to have drawings. So like if you look at the two on either side here, there are no drawings. It's just the sculpture part of things. If we go to these, it's all sculpture, really. The one in the center here probably lends itself the best if you had 2D art that you wanted to include, but also the one on the far right, the round one, could potentially have 2D art. So what I'm trying to figure out is, am I asking for a single artist who's a sculptor and then we put a sign on it? Or am I asking for a team of artists that might include a sculptor to design the monument and a painter or illustrator or something to do the to do some signage? I'm trying to distinguish between 2D art and signage, because I thought I heard that we wanted both. So from my perspective, the signage is the interpretive piece that tells about the person who the park is named after. And it may have photographs or it may have illustrations, but I also heard you say that there might be other, a colorful abstract or something that somehow represents. We don't have to decide this minute. If you want, I can keep going through the presentation, and maybe by the end you'll have some thoughts on what you'd like to see in a RFQ.
What is
Yeah.
interesting about that middle one there, that middle one.
Yeah.
What is interesting to me about that is that the use of color, and I'm not saying those have to be the specific colors, but that the use of color is really functions as an eye magnet.
Yeah,
so in one sense, again, my sense, I'll let the people from the Art Commission, just contribute everything that they want in terms of ideas. But to me, the goal that I had expressed in the previous meeting, our first meeting, was that using art, if you will, and that can be colors or that can be other things, but using art, if you will, as a way in which to be a magnet, if you will, an eye magnet that will draw people to it. Now, of the ones, now I view that middle one as very informational, and to me, a photograph can be informational too. But it's very informational, but yet that one actually works as an eye magnet. Whereas there are other ones here, of course, that are much more artistic, and they're very interesting too. But so I'll just say that for me, the idea that I think would work is something that draws the park people, the visitors, to come and look at what's there, and whatever works at that is what I consider to be good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The more we go to sculpture, I would imagine the more the price goes up. But anyway, that's another issue.
That is true. Yeah.
That's a big issue.
Yeah, it's a big issue, considering we're trying to do. It's not just one or two parks,
Right.
So it's not like a piece of sculpture in front of a corporate building or something.
Right.
And actually, maybe you can spend a lot of money because that's one really significant piece of sculpture in front of that. Whereas in this particular case, we're talking about propagation of the signage, if you will.
I hit you right on your comment, Joe. It seems that regardless of the style or the design of it, it's an informational post. It's there to tell people why they're in this park.
Mm-hmm.
The messaging and so on is tantamount to whatever we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of agree with Joe that that middle one probably accomplishes the objective better than the one on the left. Which to me actually is scary, and the price for that, quite candidly, scares me. I may be wrong, but just looking at it, I'm saying, oh my God, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so that's just my 2 pennies worth right now.
Okay.
By the way, it's we actually have a live example of the middle one in the Alviso Adobe Park. It's not identical to this, but conceptually, it's the same. It's four-sided, as the middle one is, and it's multiple panels in height, and of course it's four-sided. So in other words, and it's a mixture of photograph and text and so on. So if you're interested in, if any of you have if everybody's visited then the Alvisa Adobe Park, then you know what I'm referring to. And if you haven't, you might see a variation of this middle one by looking at the one at the Alvisa Adobe Park. Not all of the art, in my opinion, needs to be, particularly with something like that, because there's many panels, not all of the art has to be strictly historical, which is to say photographic. And there's a lot of opportunity, for example, to convert photographs into art.
Yeah.
And that's maybe a one way in which to, or even a blend. Some panels are paintings, if you will, of art, colorized, but artistic renderings of what might have been originally a photograph. And other ones could be real photographs, and then there's some choices about which one do you want to be a photograph and which one would you like to be much more graphic in the sense of more artistic. But again, to me, the motivation of having with whatever we choose in the park is to draw people to them and help them understand something about the park, as well as to satisfy a kind of a cultural need,
Yeah. And I think we will have to have a combination of a person who can actually envision the 2D and somebody who can actually create this structure. So, graphic artist and a sculptor who can actually do this.
There's another point too, that particular middle slide. I'm not sure how high it is, but if the audience is standard height, it may be a bit of a challenge to read the upper panels.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't necessarily have to be 4 panels high, and you're right. I would say that's that might even be something like 8 feet or something. Yeah, and so and actually, in other words, if we were to adopt the middle one, I would maybe even suggest, if the panels were that size, maybe only 3 high, not 4 high. Four high might be just. I would agree. I think 4 high would be maybe too much.
Unless, Joe, that top panel is some creative thing, or more of a sculpture or something like that.
Yes, and not something that you need to read.
Exactly.
But to appreciate visually.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think one of the things that I would need to figure out with your help here is what do we desire for content, so that we can tell potential artists what we're looking for. And so, some of it maybe is how many panels do we want them to have, or how many sides do we want them to have? The one we just looked at looked like it had 16 panels worth of information or pictures. But we could go with as few as 1. We could go with lots. We also need to think about, do we want all of these markers to match in terms of content? So if we do, roughly how much interpretive text am I telling an artist to plan for? And what kinds of interpretive text do we want on the panel? And I think, Joe, you'll probably have some good thoughts about what we might have available to us.
Yeah, and what's available is going to vary from park to park in terms of I need to think about, in terms of all of the named parks, what is actually available in terms of photographs or things that could be adapted, from photographs to an artistic rendering. That's an interesting thing. Just as an aside, and this is unique to a specific park, the Senate Park, the Johnson Park, that's in south. Well, it's actually it's in South Milpitas. It's relatively close to land S between Park Victoria and so on. But anyway, and that's part of the old Senate property. There might be something interesting there in the that we may be able to do that's a little bit unique and very specific to it. There's a descendant. There's a descendant who's still living, and one of the things that he did about a year ago, is I think just before the pandemic, was that he donated to the society a number of things. One of the things being really valuable, interesting, was basically the family album, and yeah, and it was probably about 4 inches thick, and each photograph was mounted in a panel and so on. The photographs could slip in and out of these panels that had an oval shape that allowed. What was interesting about that, I get to the point, is there are some photographs of the Senate House, which is actually interesting at several levels historically. But one of the most interesting things is that they have a family painting of the house, and it would require permission. But I mean, that would be really kind of interesting. And by the way, one more aside in that vein, and then I'll let the meeting go on however way you want. One of the things that was part of that collection of things that was donated to the society was a short letter, a short description, and it was written by one of the children. They were in the house during the 1906 earthquake. And there is a family description of what the 1906 earthquake felt like in Milpitas. And it turns out it shook the house badly, and they wound up, as is common, as a matter of fact, is that they felt uncomfortable enough that they didn't want to sleep in the house for a while. Right. But anyway, so there's actually, in other words, what I would call first-hand source information, as well as stuff that's in, say, the historical, just in terms of historical research, but first-person account of what the 1906 earthquake was like, and that could be like a unique contribution to the Senate Park thing. So we don't have a lot of stuff that could actually be that interesting in many cases, but in some of these cases, I think we're going to be able to do something pretty nice. For but like I say, I'm also just really open to ideas from the artistic side of this group, but anyway,
I would like to see that conversation in a park. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I did I actually read the content of that in a historical society meeting and so on and so forth, but it was just a great first-person account, and fairly brief, but it was a great first-person account of what it was like in Milpitas, not in San Francisco, but and, what that suggests is, by the way, is you can then get an impression of the magnitude of that quake, and in particular the fire. And actually, Milpitas, by the way, there are a few photographs of physical manifestations, what happened as a result of the ground tremors. But the most interesting thing was at night, so everybody knew that there was this earthquake because the earthquake did affect structures in Milpitas, but not the way it did in San Francisco. And of course, the worst part of San Francisco was the fire, and that's what was so dramatic in terms of the first-person account, because at night they could see basically the sky lit by the fires of San Francisco, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. So anyway, we'll have some opportunity to do some really interesting things on a park by park basis, and some will be less so, and maybe that'll be a great opportunity also in those cases where maybe photographs are not available or weak, where we can definitely really exploit artistic angles and decide on how to artistically present some information for that particular park.
So I'm sorry.
Tegan, sorry, go ahead, John. Yeah.
No, Joe, you can go ahead.
Tegan, I actually looked up the park I was mentioning last week,
Mhm.
and I wanted to share a few pictures of what they had done. This is a huge park which is connected throughout the city. So there are several sections of artwork, sculptures, and what was very interesting was the way that high schools competed to create sculptures, which
Mm.
were actually used to create totem poles, and
Mhm.
they had that installed in the parks. And I
Mm.
thought that was a very cool idea because we have a really good art program in Milpitas High School.
Mhm.
And so at one point we could probably coordinate with them and see. So I wanted to share some of those pictures. Maybe I could send, I don't know how to do that. I can
Yeah,
just share.
send them to me. We can't do a screen share right now with you, but
Yeah,
then send them to me and then I can share them for a future
that'd be
meeting.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mhm.
Too
Which
bad
sort
we-
of is a nice segue to the fact that you had mentioned, I think, youth art at the last
Yes.
meeting, that you would like to, think about the fact that not everybody who's viewing this is old enough to read. And so, maybe some segments of it that would appeal to the littler members of our community as they're trying, use the park.
So,
Was there,
if I may, one thing that occurred to me, and this is in no denigration on Joe because and history, but the parks also there's of interest is the fauna and the wildlife, etc. That should not be ignored in some of these parks anyway. So when we talk about the history, I think we also should not ignore the opportunity to talk about birds, the hummingbirds, the butterflies, and the geese that fly over every year, fly over at a certain time of the year. So all of those could be incorporated, I think, or should be incorporated. It's part of the park.
Mhm.
I agree because Dixon Landing Park, it is actually the landing place for the geese
Yep.
every
Oh,
year.
okay.
So that would be a very interesting information to let people know because it's every year the same time that they come and land there and stay for some time. So that would be an interesting information to share.
Mhm.
Sorry, we haven't answered any questions that you raised.
You haven't, but I'm determined to get to a slide where you feel compelled to answer a question and give me some direction. So let me go on. Okay, so I was actually wrong. I missed Sunny Hills Albert Augustine Jr. Memorial Park last time. So we have 19 of these parks that are named. I don't know how we missed that. And based on the information, Joe, that you gave us, I think we're looking at Martin Murphy for Murphy Park.
Yeah, and actually officially, you'll notice that we have Albert Augustine Jr.
Mm-hmm.
Officially, matter of fact, Renee sent me a photograph that well, not a photograph. Well, it was an image, a digital image, which was a layout of streets and the elementary school, and it's labeled Martin Murphy Park. But I would like to make the following notation. It really should be Martin Murphy Jr.
Oh, okay.
Okay, which and officially the city referred to it as the Martin Murphy Elementary School. They did not use the word junior, but there's just, it wouldn't, to me, it wouldn't make any sense if it was senior. I mean, they all came as a big family group. But the point is that Martin Murphy Jr. actually had land presence in Milpitas and so on.
Okay.
He owned he owned quite a bit of a chunk of the Rancho Milpitas once it started to break down into smaller units. So I'm certain that it would be Martin Murphy Jr. is actually the true thing. I still haven't had time to go to the Milpitas Post to see if I can actually see if there's any news in discussions in terms of as that school was announced back prior to its construction. In other words, the intent to build it and so on. But it, like I said, not only am I correcting the idea that it was Leo Murphy, because I really think it was Martin Murphy, but in particular Martin Murphy Jr.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. Thank you. And then of
Joe,
course,
Sorry?
go on.
Joe, are any of the parks, do they have any information about the Native Americans who stayed here? Is there any park that would be able to include the original community?
So there's some information at the Alviso Adobe, I believe, that has a little bit, but I think we'll get more with our exhibit, a little bit more.
Yeah, the other thing I'm trying to think of to add to your remark is possibly the Jose Higuera Adobe, but it would be inside the building because none of that is on the outside that I can think of. But there are some informational panels on the inside of the Higuera Adobe,
Okay.
and it's entirely likely that there may be some informational panel there that would be pre-Spanish, if you will, right? In other words, pre-Jose, because it would have, that would have, yeah, that's the one other possible park. None of the other parks that I can think of to respond to Chavita's comment, you'd almost have to go to our two Spanish parks to where it really fits, because prior to those ranchos, they represent two different ranchos. The Higuera Adobe is Rancho Tulecitos, and the Jose Alviso Park, that's Rancho Milpitas. But those are two of the three ranchos that basically make up today's Milpitas. None of the other parks are for people that would make any sense. One of the places that it ought to be, I can double check, is the Jose Alviso Park. They're just off of Piedmont.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I say that is because I believe that there was some archaeological evidence of maybe like a small tribal village there in pre-Spanish time. Most of the other names of these parks, you see the two old parks in terms of pioneers, the two old parks are the two that we've just been discussing. And then there's a second layer, which are like the pioneers, the 1850s, 60s, 70s kind of layers. And then there's a third layer of parks, which are more the modern era, like the Tom Evatt Park, the last one on this particular panel. That would be Bob Peacoat. Actually, I don't know much history about Bob Peacoat at the moment. But a number of these others, I think we really have at least three distinctly from a cultural or ethnic point of view. Well, maybe not ethnic, a cultural point of view. We have different eras here. But mostly it's the Spanish era, Spanish-Mexican era, the Hispanic era, and then the early pioneers, and then basically an example of a more modern one would be, say, the Bob McGuire Park in terms of his presence in Milpitas. That'd be a more recent one. So yeah, so you make a good point about because there's basically the Indians were here for about 10,000 years before essentially the Europeans came in and took it over.
So maybe one park we could have a little bit of design kind of, ideas, colors, which involves that tribe that lived here.
Actually, for John's point or yours, Javita, it occurs to me that would be to bring that history in also, particularly in terms of illustration, that would have to be probably be creative art. In other words, we'd have to have suggestions. But
Yeah.
that would be, we wouldn't have anything photographic, for example, but we could certainly conceive of scenes and have those artistically done.
Mhm.
Yeah.
John, last time you mentioned wanting to know about bike trails and where the parks fell on the bike trails. So what you're looking at here is the existing bike trails right now, because the bike and ped master plan, the new one's not done. I don't know for certain what all will get built.
Yeah.
But of the stuff that exists, you've got a little list there at the bottom of this slide as the ones that are actually on a trail, on a bike trail. So they mostly seem to be on the
Hetch Hetchy.
yeah, well, because the Hetch Hetchy runs, I'm sitting here pointing at my screen and you can't see it. Runs down Pico and crosses over, I think. So Alviso and then Sandalwood and that,
Augustine.
yeah. So
quite a few of those parks are on the bottom list. Quite a few of those parks are on the Hetch Hetchy.
Yeah.
So that's may inform your decision about which parks you want to recommend we work on.
Yeah, Strickroth, by the way, is not. He's just, that park is just west of the Hetch Hetchy by about several blocks.
Oh, okay, all right.
So is it possible, Tegan, to send me a copy of that, or send us individually a
Sure.
copy of that?
Yeah,
I'd love to take a closer look at it.
Yeah.
If I may.
yeah. No, I definitely can do that. We were also going to discuss funding options to recommend to City Council. The Public Art Fund is one source of funds. I think that's the source that everybody's thinking of right now. But depending on how much art we end up with in the structures, there may be other alternatives that we want to look at. There may be some historical grant funding that we can find. We will have our new Milpitas Recreation and Community Services Foundation starting up soon. So that is a nonprofit that will be raising funds for our programs and facilities and parks. So that might be an option. There's also, crowdsourcing. Some cities have turned to, the folks who live in the immediate area to a park to, contribute. And then you may have other ideas that I'm not even thinking of. So.
Okay. If I may, just as a question more than anything else, we have listed 19 parks, which are named parks, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is the objective, as it stands right now, to have all of those with markers?
I think that that's part of what this group is recommending. I wish that some members of some of the other members of PRCRC were active on the call right now. Joe, perhaps, I don't know if you were even part of that commission when this was first discussed, so I don't know if you can enlighten us any about it.
Not when it was first discussed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've only been on PRCRC for April, May, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
My sense, John, is that yes, eventually they would like to have something for all the named parks, but that it doesn't have to occur right away. And so, yes, you're talking about a lot of money if you talk about, 19 times a big structure.
Well, this is a very biased comment, but I'll just go on the record anyway. I would really like the Public Art Fund to be at the bottom of the list rather than at the top of the list.
Duly noted.
Okay.
So do you have an idea how much it would cost?
I don't.
For
I need to kind of understand what you're thinking of so I can get some pricing. But until I have a good sense of what your mission is, it's hard to get a quote. So having, heard a lot of discussion tonight about the panel, the one that had multiple panels and brightly colored. If that's the kind of direction that you're thinking of, now I could go and say, okay, if somebody were to fabricate it, how much might that cost? And, knowing that an artist would put their own special touches on it, and perhaps it has something on the, top that makes it unique to Milpitas, or, perhaps we're looking at an artist team to do the panels, or a contest for, youth art, or I don't know what, but
maybe we should choose 3 different designs so we can have a choice in, what would be a better or cheaper option.
Yeah, so it's hard to clarify, but what you're going to do ultimately is you're going to go, if we're doing this as a public art piece, we're going out to the artists and we're saying, we want you to build something and we're going to give you this much money. So what I'm trying to do is determine kind of what's a reasonable amount of money, and knowing that, hey, artist, if you get this commission, we're going to build 19 of these things eventually. You're probably giving us a design for them, and we're probably having them fabricated, the structure fabricated over a period of multiple years. And if you, the artist who gets the commission, is not, interested in doing the panels, then maybe we are having other artists work on those panels later in time. So I'm trying to figure out how, if I have multiple artist calls, if I have a call for images and a call for the structure separately.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing. I don't know if there's a prefab structure that's like what you're, leaning toward, and if we wanted to go with some sort of a prefab structure and then just pay the artists, to do the images. But if we're doing that, then it's less, could be less money, but it's also less artistic, so less, less likely to be a good use of the Public Art Fund.
Tegan, explain one thing to me. We talk about these markers being designed by an artist.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it more true that might be a source that would come from an architect? I'm not saying that, but it seems to me that knowing some of the architects that I've met recently, they are tuned in to what can I say, more attractive ways of designing things that perhaps would be more appropriate, rather than going to an artist for a fabricated product.
Yeah, that may be true. I've certainly known and worked with artists in other places where they're, doing a design for a bus stop, and then, they do an artistic bus stop, and then the city gets multiple bus stops, or gates or,
Yeah.
benches or something. So it's not at all unheard of for these artists who work in metal or wood to make something that
Yeah.
is repeated
Yeah. Okay.
series.
By the way, that middle one, the one with 16 panels, one of the things that we're open to thinking about is if that were the design. In this particular case, there's basically, you'll see they're basically single panels. And they're either a photograph or textual, informational. Of course, we don't have to do that explicitly. You can, in some cases, if you wanted to have something that was panoramic, you could have something that's 360 degrees that literally wraps around all four sides of, a big wide panorama. So there's things to do there. The other thing that I am intrigued about as an idea, I'm curious if anybody else has a similar sentiment, is essentially there are three levels of, I'm now thinking about local artists, and in particular, I'm thinking about the people who are in K to 12. And with 16 panels, for example, one could actually, in every park, we could probably conceive of a way to which to have a submission from one of the high school art classes, one of the middle school, and one of the elementaries. And then, in other words, it becomes a local competition. And that actually then helps span interest levels that are different ages, or, if you will. Different generations would be wrong, although the older people, well, actually, I don't know. I think the part that the older community, they could probably appreciate everything, the informational, the photographic, the artistic. At the really young children in the playgrounds, some very creative art that's maybe done by, if you will, their peers would actually be very appealing to them. So anyway, it's just another idea of, well, what kind of art are we tending to think about, or who are the artists? Local artists, and that would be an extreme example of local artists, may be very appealing as an idea. But again, I like to hear what John and Chavita really think about ways to do something that's very stimulative and innovative and effective.
You should be on the art commission, Joe. I agree with what Joe's saying, and I think a park is a park for the people that live there and use it. And so finding a way to have involvement by the local schools just makes so much sense. The other thing I was going to mention, Joe said, mentioned that different age groups might view things differently. People like me would probably be able to look at the top panel and say, I was there. So just to validate the history. Well, that one fell flat, so we'll move on.
No, that's, yeah, well, when you're, we're really at the creative end of the project. And of course, that's really the one that until you get a kind of a concept that we all like, that's the one that you struggle with. And once you get the right concept, then I think things get a lot easier fast.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're
It
supposed to
could be
be
like one open panel where the competition would, each school would create a tile or a panel for that particular marker every year. It could be something like that. It would be very interesting then. The whole community gets involved with
So you're
something like that.
suggesting changing it out regularly?
Maybe
Just have one panel, which is, you could do something with that.
Oh, that's a neat idea.
Yeah.
And then actually, to the extent that we don't adopt a really expensive design, that makes it actually really, really affordable, actually. In other words, it becomes less static, and then potentially in a non-interactive way, but it becomes more dynamic because it's the kind of thing that hasn't been in the park sitting there for the last 20 years or something. It's something that could evolve, and particularly if the project is financially very affordable.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a tile or, artwork which has been converted into a tile, and every year, maybe a tile or even printed on metal. And every year there is like a thing that, okay, Synod School student so and so was chosen, and that person's artwork goes there. So it becomes very interesting.
Let me ask you, playing devil's advocate for a moment, if your child is chosen, if you're chosen this year, how would you feel about your artwork being taken off next year for some other child's artwork to go on? You don't have what is traditionally with public art where people can come back year after year and say, oh, when you've had a community piece, their thing lives on and they can see it. It sounds like what you're suggesting is more temporary, so they wouldn't have long-term ownership over, this particular piece.
Well-
I mean, the way we can look at it is it's a yearly event, annual event. And
Well, if
they
it,
can,
if it's a tile or something that can be removed but is solid in nature, it's not going to change. The family could keep it and say, look, this was shown for a year,
yeah.
or something like that. But I think that's getting into the weeds a little bit. I know we're getting close to the time, and I wanted to ask you a question, Tegan. We've raised a few questions that it seems to me need to be clarified by the PRC Commission before we have our next meeting. One question that I would have is that 19, we're not going to do all of those this year, right? So it's going to be a lengthy period of time. So would the PRC have a suggestion on which parks they would prioritize and choose first? So I don't know when the PRC meets again.
They actually meet June 7th, which is the day that I'm suggesting that we have our next meeting at 5:30 on June 7th. Because obviously we're not finishing it off today, so we need to keep working. Do you think that, well, first of all, does that date work for people? Can we do June 7th? And then if you like the idea of something where there's multiple panels, I can work on getting some pricing for that kind of a thing. So we
I won't be
understand.
available June 7th.
Okay.
To answer your second question there, Tegan, it seems to me that we've got to drive a stake in the ground. We may not end up with that particular one, but why don't we work a little bit on that particular one, that center one, get some feel to, roughly what you would consider would be a fair estimate of price.
Okay.
That would give us something, even if it's too little or too much, it would give us something to work with.
Okay. That sounds good.
And I also feel that it doesn't seem fair that only one artist or sculptor is allowed to do 19 of them, It should be, we should allow a few more, people who are interested, and so it's not just the one person who's doing
Well,
it all.
I guess it depends whether you want them to be matching or not. If you wanted them all to be matching structures, then you would probably have one person design them, and then we would have that and fabricate them as we needed them for future parks. If you are having multiple people do it, that is going to increase the cost, because then that's basically, you know, a new call every time for this, and we would be recruiting artists over the course of multiple years, multiple artists. So, so that is, you know, that certainly we could do that, but that's a thing to keep in mind, is that it will be more expensive if you get you know, some number of artists to do them, to do the structure part of things. And maybe we end up not going with an artist to do the structure if we find that the artwork that we're most interested in is 2D art on the panels. Maybe we are veering away from a unique artist designed piece for the parks.
Yeah, my hope is that this becomes a feature of Milpitas. Not only is it fun for the community and the residents, but it's also forms some form of attraction for people that are visiting the South Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I want to spend any public art funds. I do think that somehow it's got to be very creative. We've got to be very, very creative about this. It's got to be fun, and it's got to be creative. And it's not just, you know, some basic style. It's got to be something that would attract people. So that's my 2 pennies worth.
Okay.
And if it's something that has to be that is repeated, then the design has to be very, you know, like a really good design, like a interesting structure. But if it's, you know, just a simple, like a column thing, I think we could kind of have different styles in different parks. We don't need to have just one style in every park. I mean, 19 of the same thing would probably be be boring, you know. It would be interesting to have, I like the one with the metal bird in it. We could have kind of different things. Again, I don't know the cost, what the cost would be, but per year we could probably go, okay, let's do 5 parks or 6 parks this year, and the next year we do 6 more. So could we do it that way? So we have different designs, but every year we have a different artist tackling, or we are doing it all in 1 year.
No.
We're not doing all 19 in 1 year, no. Unless you want bronze plaques with into the ground, yeah.
Even 19 bronze plaques would take a lot. You couldn't do
Yeah.
I
that.
know. So then we do have wiggle room in creating, you know, coming up with some nice designs. And
Crystal, you've been very quiet. Do you have any reaction to the discussion?
I like the idea of the panels. So we'll see how they go if we decide to check the costs and see if we could do multiple panels and change them, but we'll see. I would like to know the cost.
Yeah. How much money do you have in your budget? She's not answering me, Tina.
I
Crystal,
think she's on mute.
do you know what the PRCRC's intention was as far as how fast this project would happen and how many parks you might do?
Not at the top of my head. It wasn't a fast timeline, probably over 5 years at the
Okay.
earliest.
Okay.
Okay,
even
so if
that's-
we have
even
19
that's pretty
parks, we're
aggressive.
talking perhaps 4 a year, maybe, that we might be doing.
Yeah. That's actually pretty ambitious, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
It would be great because that would mean that that project is completed in 5 years, and actually, if we have something that's really effective, but also, not really expensive, it opens the door later. I think there should be priority given to the named parks, but it opens the door later to doing something similar for the non-named parks, because there's certainly history that's not specific to an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And and we've already said that we don't even necessarily think that everything, well, actually, it's not even that. We don't actually think that everything that's in one of those kiosks or on one of those kiosks is necessarily entirely historical or informational, but also just purely creative and inspired by some other aspect that one can point out in that particular park. With the O'Toole thing, for example, there's not only is there the individual, but of course the lane itself were these elms and so on. So there's an example of to add a very a good fit, where a natural component to whatever we do with that particular kiosk, because the route, that park was, to that land, to that mansion, was like I say, this wood lane, specifically elms and so on. So there are a variety of, anyway, that one still is a named park, but I can think Foothill Park. Okay. One can see building a kiosk in a variety of ways, and it's not a named park. And so, like I said, if we actually have an affordable design, it's something that we can say, well, we're after the named parks first, but that doesn't mean that we don't have maybe some interest in doing all of the parks in some fashion. And that's where, maybe choosing the right one. Jovita makes an interesting point. Is that boring if we have that many kiosks? I don't think the kiosk was what would be boring. What makes it either boring or really interesting is what we put on it. But I understand the notion about variety, but I guess in my sense of it, and that's only my personal sense, is that the variety comes from what we put onto the kiosk and not so much the kiosk itself.
Okay.
But anyway, I'm very stimulated by the discussion and to see how this evolves in terms of the idea, because this is an opportunity to do something really kind of fun and interesting and educational.
Okay. Good. Well, I think I have some marching orders. It sounds like we want to look at a pricing for the kiosk type of thing that has multiple panels on it, and get a sense of what we're looking at in terms of cost.
Yeah.
And then we can reconvene and talk about, if it costs roughly this, then do you want to proceed, or how fast do you want to proceed? Okay.
Can you also find out information about the glass one, the one which had the glass etching information? That one?
Sure. Yeah.
And the metal with the bird and the printed metal.
Okay.
Just as close as you can get it. I mean, don't spend a lot of time on it, Tegan, because the prices will range, I think. But I think it's a good idea. Yeah. We didn't get back to dates. Do you want to schedule another meeting, or?
Well, we have a bit of a limitation as far as the calendar goes. So I don't know that I have anything besides June 7th. And I think we need to sort of take a roll call and see if Joyita's the only one that's missing. We might have to proceed with June 7th. We were trying to get this done this year. So
This
at least
fiscal year?
this fiscal year to make a recommendation to council.
Okay.
So June 7th is kind of the last opportunity for you guys to have something where I could get it to council before they go for their summer break.
Keegan, I think that you're being overly optimistic, even if we had a meeting on June the 7th. I'm not sure that we're close to it. You know, Joe summarized it nicely. I think the discussion is very healthy, but I think it's going to take a few more discussions before we get to a point where you could wrap it up and say, okay, we've got a direction.
Well, that may be, but I'm trying to keep to the schedule council requested.
I understand.
So.
I understand.
So, but I think that we've got some good information. I have plenty of stuff to work on researching. So,
Okay, I'm available on the 7th.
Okay.
That may help.
I'm available
Okay.
because that's PRC meeting.
I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then we can just check in with Becky. Okay.
So Joyita is probably on her way to Mexico. So if we pay for her not to go to Mexico, maybe she'll join us.
You're very right, but not Mexico. I'm returning from Chicago. Not so fancy.
All right. Well, thank you all for giving me an hour of your time today, and we will meet again and talk further. And I will go ahead and send you the PowerPoint
Thank you.
so that you have that.
Thank you.
And
Okay.
Tegan, I'll send you
Thank
that information of the park. I'll email it to you.
Oh, that would be
particular-
great. Yeah, then I can
Yeah.
share it with everybody. Okay.
Okay,
That'd be
great.
perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take
Okay.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you
everyone.
in 15 minutes.
Yes.